Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Gretchen Wall from the Produce Safety Alliance. I have 2:01 on my clock, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Today's call the topic is On-Farm Readiness Review Program and Toolkit, and Dr. Kristin Woods, who is our Southeast Extension Associate based in Alabama, was the organizer for this call. So let me just go over a couple quick announcements and how the meeting's going to be run, and then I'll turn it over to Kristin to introduce our speakers for today. So all of you currently are muted on this call. We will have some time for questions and answers throughout the presentation, and I'll let you know whenever I'm going to take the mute off. But just because there's a lot of people joining the call and people might be in busy airports or in cars or out on the farm, just going to have everyone muted for now. We are recording this session and we will be circulating notes. So if you have to jump off the call or want to share it with colleagues, we will make this available on our website in a day or so. We catalog all the meetings on there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristin to do some of the introductions for this afternoon's call. Kristin?
Hey, Gretchen. Today we have Mr. Bob Ehart, who's the Senior Policy and Science Advisor with the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, and Gary Weber, who's also with the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, and Dr. Michelle Danyluk from the Department of Food Science and Human Nutrition, Citrus Research and Extension Center with the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences at the University of Florida. And they will be presenting today on the On-Farm Readiness Review, which is an on-farm component to the produce safety rule outreach and education. Our presenters have spent the last several years working closely with a group of educators from around the country, including our own Betsy Ben with Cornell University, Travis Chapin at the University of Florida, Chris Gunner with North Carolina State University, and Wes Klein and Meredith Melendez with Rutgers, and Philip Choco at Michigan State University. So thank you to our presenters for your willingness to share today, and I'll let you guys take it from here.
Perfect, thanks, Kristin. Gretchen, can you advance a couple slides?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm Michelle Danyluk, like Kristin said, from the University of Florida, and Bob, I'm just gonna start presenting, and anywhere you wanna cut in, please feel free to start to cut in and take over where I leave off. Next slide, please, Gretchen. So like Kristin said, the On-Farm Readiness Review has been going on for several years. It is an effort that's been driven by NASDA, which is the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, of which Bob Ehart is on the phone in a partnership with FDA, USDA, the Produce Safety Alliance, and the On-Farm Readiness Review development team also included state partners from the Michigan Department of Agriculture, the Vermont Department or Vermont Agency for Agriculture, Food and Markets, Oregon Department of Agriculture, and the North Carolina State Department of Agriculture, in addition to the extension colleagues that Kristin mentioned above. But very much this process would complete that training course, the grower training course that we're all involved in teaching, and then move forward to do an on-farm readiness review on their individual farms. Have any follow-up technical assistance that may be needed, and then be ready for the on-farm readiness review process. Next slide, please. So why might a grower want to do this? And there's a lot of reasons why it might be beneficial for farmers to do an on-farm readiness review. Certainly it's voluntary and it's free. Nobody's ever going to show up and demand a farmer do an on-farm readiness review, but it is that one-on-one interaction that will help them align what they're already doing to what's required in the rule and help them figure out what they're missing from the rule, sort of help them download some of the overload they may have received during that PSA grower training, because it really provides those personalized discussions on their farm about their specific food safety activities. So it's really important to note that during an on-farm readiness review, the reviewers won't be taking any notes and they'll rather, encourage the grower or the farmer to take notes as is necessary. And the reason that the on-farm readiness review was designed this way was to maintain farmer confidentiality as much as possible, while simultaneously complying with the Federal Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, and state sunshine laws that may require the release of any notes created by government employees, and in some states that includes university extension. And so we really, as we worked through this process, wanted to make sure that the process was an on-farm participation in an on-farm readiness review was maintained confidential, and there were no FOIA-able documents generated during that process. Now, I will talk about what happens if on an on-farm readiness review, the team encounters an egregious condition or some other problem, and I'll cover that at the end of the presentation. But really, we see this on-farm readiness review, or these OFRRs, as a way for growers to, on their individual farms or in their packing houses, assess their readiness for a produce safety rule inspection. Next slide, please. And where the on-farm readiness review is a little bit different from traditional audits is in this conversational approach that's adopted in an on-farm readiness review. So in a traditional audit approach, or what a lot of growers may be used to, the question would be, do you have a sick leave policy? And the answer would simply be yes. Whereas in an on-farm readiness review, we're very much training the reviewers or assessors to ask open-ended questions. What is your sick leave policy? And then to get a more in-depth answer to better gauge the readiness of that farmer with the rule. And it'll allow the subsequent ask for further questions after that initial question is asked, to again get more information, so those assessors can get more information on what's going on in the farm. So we can see a little bit different approach than a traditional audit approach. Next slide, please. So it's not a point-based system. Instead, it's very much a discussion with a group of growers where it will cover the whole farm, and it'll look at the critical areas of the farm that are highlighted specifically in the produce safety rule. And again, instead of giving a points, where it'll give you is priority areas for a grower to work on to reach compliance of the rule, and been developed in this walk-around process, where we'll actually walk around and view different things on the farm and talk through exactly what's happening and what food safety practices exist on the farm. After that walk-around process, you'll move into a final meeting where the assessor OFRR team will talk through sort of the highlights of what growers are doing well, and which areas they could use improvement on to be compliant with the rule. And then the third piece there is an evaluation. This evaluation piece is not for the growers themselves, but it's for the assessors to enter in, again, not specific information on the farm, but specific information on which aspects of the rule the farm may not be ready on to a national survey, so that that data in terms of readiness can be collected. So we'll walk through each of these different steps shortly. Is there a problem? All right, next slide, please, Gretchen. All right, so involved in this on-farm readiness review is also this large manual that is in we call the on-farm readiness review tool. It includes 15 different tabs of information, including a glossary of terms, the PSR decision tree that was developed by FDA, a number of FSMA fact sheets, and then resource documents that we'll talk through. During each OFRR, each grower participant will be given a copy of this manual by the OFRR assessor team. Next slide, please. So within those different 15 tabs of information, or what we call these different on-farm readiness review resource document modules. So what we did is we took the produce safety rule, and instead of presenting it in the order it's presented in the CFR, we broke it into different sections that followed a general sequence of events, from farming activities through harvesting activities, and then through packing or holding activities. And it allowed the team to then pick out which parts of these activities are relevant to their farm, and can then quickly link to those parts of the on-farm readiness review. So you can see that there's a worker health and hygiene module that of course is relevant on any covered farm, includes information on visitor policies, health and hygiene, hand washing, toilet facilities. Then there's a series of pre-harvest questions, including water, sanitation, worker training, wildlife, and soil amendments. So depending on what a farm looks like, you may not end up using all of those different modules. If the farm harvests their own produce, then there is a series of harvesting questions, again, water, sanitation, worker training, and wildlife, and then followed up with a post-harvest section of water, sanitation, and worker training. And again, these different modules can be picked and are used based on the activities that are happening on individual farms. Next slide, please. So the way that we figure out which of those different modules are happening on the individual farms is through our initial OFRR decision tree, and it's designed to figure out which parts of a PSR apply to the farm you're on. And so that if a part doesn't apply, you simply don't ask questions or follow up related to those parts of the rule, therefore simplifying the rule and the OFRR process. Next slide, please. So to give you some ideas of the nuance of this decision tree, this is question 3 on the decision tree, and this specifically asks the farm, do you have any growing operations covered under the produce safety rule? Because as you know, or you probably know based on the farm, you can just do harvesting activities and still meet the farm definition. So again, it's nuanced. If a farm does have growing operations, then they include the pre-harvest animal module, pre-harvest worker training, and pre-harvest sanitation modules. If they don't have growing operations, you skip down to question 6 and you don't do any of the pre-harvest modules with that farm. Next slide, please, Gretchen. This is question number 8. So again, just another question off of the decision tree, again, to show some of the nuances of this decision tree. Again, you are all on this call, you all understand how complicated the farm definitions are, especially related to classification of activities and secondary activities farms and packing houses and what rule they're under, at least currently, until we get more guidance. So this is to sort of get at, do you actually pack or hold under the produce safety in a packing house or shed on your operation? And then again, if yes, post-harvest worker training module applies and the post-harvest sanitation module applies. If no, you're done with the decision tree. Question 9 would then move on to ask specifically if you use any post-harvest water, to get again at which modules might apply on a specific farm. Next slide, please. After the decision tree is done and you figure out which parts of the rule are applicable on your specific farm, that's when you would transition to what we're calling the walkaround document with walkaround questions. And the grower and the team would then walk around the operation to look at the different activities being done on the farm as they relate back to the produce safety rule. The tool was arranged again in the order of production, harvest, and packing, but it can really work in any direction based on what makes sense for that farm or based on what's going on at the farm. Again, the tool and the team are really trained to go to look at whatever activities are being done at that time. So if they arrive and packing or in harvesting is going on, they'll want to go out and look at the harvesting first. We believe that most on-farm readiness reviews will take somewhere between 2 and 4 hours. They're not as in-depth as a lot of the audits are, again, because they're hitting the highlights of the produce safety rule. And one of the things we train the assessors to do is very much to keep to the predetermined schedule of how much time of the growers they'll take up. Next slide, please. So during this walk around, again, the OFRR team will have a what we call the walk document, and it's a series of questions based on the produce safety rule, and to try to deem it how it applies to the specific operation. And they're not asked in the language of the produce safety rule, but they are all linked back to verbiage from the rule, and they actually link back to that toolkit manual that I spoke about earlier. Next slide, please. So what is actually in that OnFarm Readiness Review tool, or that large manual, is a table broken down by each module that sort of corresponds back to the rule. And so we've got 3 different categories, or 3 different columns in that table. Next slide, please, Gretchen. The very first column is the actual text of the regulation that applies to that module, including the regulatory number linked back to the CFR. Next slide, please. The middle column is the recommendation that addresses activities that may lead to compliance with the regulation. Included in that column of the table are the musts and shoulds, as they are included in the produce safety rule. Of course, must are things you must do, and should are things you really should be doing but are not a must. Next slide, please. And then that final column is the evaluation column, and that indicates how compliance with the regulation may be evaluated by assessors. It does include records when records are mandatory. They are written down in that evaluation column. So it is a fairly hefty tool of document. As you can imagine, there's a lot of regulation, and the recommendations in some cases are quite lengthy, as are the evaluations in some cases. But this is what the actual tool looks like. Next slide, please. At that final meeting after the walk-around document, the team will again provide both positive areas and areas for improvement, and they'll again review and explain how to use the tool. What they'll also do at that point is take specific areas they found where the grower may need to do a little bit more work to be in compliance with the rule, and they'll point those out to them within the tool, and then show them what different activities they could do to become more compliant with that part of the rule. One of the things that's really important that happens in this final meetings is that we also spend some time making farmers aware of the changes in the rule that are still coming. Things, as we all know on this call, biological soil amendments of animal origin, and the ag water provisions that are being readdressed. Again, you go through the areas where the grower does need some work, and you can discuss potential follow-up assistance as may be needed, and then address specific grower questions. Next slide, please. So I can't poll you all to find out how many of you are involved or have been through an OFRR training, but one of the questions we anticipated getting is how you can get involved in an OFRR training if you haven't been already. Next slide, Gretchen. And the way to do that is to attend an On-Farm Readiness Review training class. And able to be an assessor for an On-Farm Readiness Review, you need to sit through the 2-day or two and a bit day workshop offered by NASDA. That training class, like I said, involves 2 days. It involves 2 half-days in a classroom and 2 half-days on a farm to both see how an on-farm readiness review is done, and then practice doing an on-farm readiness review in round-robin scenarios, and then actually go out on the farm and practice doing an on-farm readiness review. If you are in university extension or some other type of educator, and you would like to get involved in an on-farm readiness review class, you need to contact your state Department of Agriculture to attend. Again, run through NASDA, the states who have access to the seats in those on-farm readiness review training courses. And so you do need to contact your state to attend. If you do not know who the contact in your state is, please email one of us who Kristin mentioned on the OnFarm Readiness Review Development Team, and our names are again at the end, and we will let you know who the correct person in your state is to contact to get involved in an OFRR training class. Next slide, please. So to highlight the OnFarm Readiness Review trainings we've done between January and June of 2018, we held 16 trainings in those states highlighted in red below. You'll see a number of them are in the south, and this is because we were training in the winter, so we needed to be places where there was produce production. We currently have a team of 8 trainers, plus 4 PSA staff who we've been working with to become trainers as well, including both Kristin and Gretchen. And to date, we have trained 296 people, including 185 state regulators and 90 extension educators, and then 21 folks from FDA PSN, both on the ORA and the CIFSAN side. Within those 8 trainings in the states highlighted, we've been on 33 different farms. Next slide, please. When you look at where those 296 people came from, oh, hang on, I'm being interrupted. Oh, sorry guys, they're clearing the dishes next to me in the room I'm in at the airport. I apologize for that. Back on this slide, if you look at where the participants we've trained have been from, those 296 folks, they have come out of the states highlighted in green there. So you can see that we've trained folks from every state that had a CAP grant at the beginning of 2018. Next slide, please. We did do a training survey to find out how the training has gone to date. And of the 59 people who've responded, 87 expect to inspect farms at some point under the produce safety rule. So the majority of them were probably from a state Department of Agriculture. 80% indicated a moderate or major impact on their ability to inspect following taking the OnFarm Readiness Review training. 97% expect to use the tools developed in the OnFarm Readiness Review course, specifically the walkaround questions. 93 indicated they're likely to use a resource manual, and 92 indicated that they were satisfied with the training. So we do believe we've developed a pretty solid training. Next slide, please. We did make a number of observations and improvements that can be made in the training that we will target with the next round of training courses we do. One of the things that became really, really clear is that when we give someone the manual and the walk-around questions and then expect them to go out the next day on a farm and do a readiness review themselves, that their lack of familiarity with the tool and the walk-around questions really were slightly problematic. And so a high level of familiarity with the OnFarm Readiness Review tool and process is really critical to a smooth question and answer and process with the farmer. We did have some desire for follow-up mentoring, and I know that's something NASDA is actively working on. Certainly, we are anxiously waiting for guidance to be released by FDA to hopefully help us on rule interpretation. Certainly, rule interpretation continues to be an issue. One of the things we noticed, and that was very clear from a lot of the growers we worked with who were used to third-party audits, were that they realized that inspection and what they're used to in an audit and what they see in an on-farm readiness review are actually very different. And so that was an eye-opening opportunity for a lot of the growers we worked with during these trainings. And that we also found that a lot of our PSR inspectors are coming out of food facility inspection positions and maybe aren't as familiar with the way things work in a farm or a packing house. And so they've got some learning to do in that area. Next slide, please. So if you're interested to when our future training classes are, any classes beyond September have not yet been scheduled. NASDA is working on them, and they're expected to continue between January and June of 2019. Again, we don't have any confirmed dates. But if you are interested in attending one of these trainings, then do reach out to your state Department of Agriculture. Next slide, please. So another question that we're expecting you all to give us is, how do I tell growers they should sign up for an on-farm readiness review? I know certainly this is something that we do at our grower trainings that we do in Florida, is tell a state how they can sign up for an on-farm readiness review. In Florida, we have both a phone-in and an online registration. That's the link to our online registration. Gretchen, if you can hit the button one more time. What NASDA is currently doing or putting together is putting together a website that's expected to launch in early September of 2018 that lists how to register in each different state. So if you're not familiar with what your state's process is to register, then you can ask your state Department of Agriculture, or you can wait until NASDA does launch this website in next month, or I guess just over a month from now, to list how to register in each state. Next slide, please. So if you've been to an on-farm readiness review training, you know that we had a training manual that still had some kinks to work out, and you've heard that there will be an updated manual. What's its status? And you can push the button one more time, Kristin. The updated manual is at the printer. I'm pleased to announce that. NASDA should be launching a storefront soon, and when I say soon, this is not FDA speak soon. This is like within the next week or two soon, that it'll be available so that the states can go online and purchase those manuals from NASDA. The walk-around questions have also been updated based on what's in the new manual, and they will be sent to those 296 folks that have participated in our training course as soon as those new manuals are available. Next slide, please. So how is the on-farm readiness review going so far? It has been started in several states, and the states that have started to date typically involve a state regulator and an extension educator. Again, kind of reviewing what I said earlier, they're free and a confidential assessment of preparedness. All documents specific to the OFRR stay on the farm, including any notes taken. Growers to date have been giving the training resource manual. The plan is for the states that have done on-farm readiness reviews to go back to all those growers and give them an updated manual. Next slide, please, Gretchen. So 86 on-farm readiness reviews have been completed between September 27th and July 27th of this year in the states highlighted in red below. So you can see a good variety of states have started this on-farm readiness review process and then have completed the post-farm visits survey. Next slide, please. What we found out from those post-visit surveys so far is that 91% of the farms that have done an on-farm readiness review to date are over 500 acres in size, and 64% of those farms sell over $500,000 worth of produce, and 43 of them have been ranked by the on-farm readiness review teams to meet the minimum requirements of the produce safety rule. The next 42 need some sort of minor improvement to meet the FSMA produce safety rule. The most common needs in terms of minor improvements to meet the FSMA PSR are time being the first, and then technical assistance being the second. Next slide, please. When we look at specific areas where the growers who've done an on-farm readiness review to date are having challenges, they are specifically related to pre-harvest water, which again should probably be no surprise to anyone. Pre-harvest water testing is in flux. Annual water system review inspections and records associated with that. Record keeping related to sanitation, cleaning and sanitation activities. Notification of food safety policies from the farm to visitors were lacking in a number of cases. A number of them needed improved toilet and hand washing facilities. And then interestingly, rodent control within packing houses was also noted as a concern. Next slide, please. So a question we often get in terms of on-farm readiness review is, does the on-farm readiness review includes a record review? And the answer is no. The on-farm readiness review, again, happens in that 2 to 4 hour period. So it's not intended to be a deep dive into the records kept on the farm. What the on-farm readiness review does ask is if you are keeping the records required, but doesn't specifically review them. Next slide, please. All right, so what happens if something wrong is found on an on-farm readiness review? And Gretchen, if you can push the button one more time. All right, what could go wrong during an OFRR is something called an egregious condition. And so the legal or the definition of an egregious condition agreed upon by FDA and NASDA is below. It's a practice, condition, or situation on a farm or in a packing house that is reasonably likely to lead to a serious adverse health consequence or death from the consumption of or exposure to covered produce, or an imminent public health hazard is posed if corrective action is not taken immediately. So if an egregious condition is found by an assessor, those assessors have been trained in a course of actions to follow up with the grower. And so it involves in, is the grower going to take an immediate corrective action to control the egregious condition? And if they do have the ability to contain and prevent a potential public health threat, and they are able to control it while the assessor team is on the farm, the situation will move no further than that. If they are not, the assessor team has been told to call a supervisor and to move forward from that. And I know that probably seems a little bit vague, but within the training course, we do spend a fair amount of time talking through situations and what control strategies could be put in place. And certainly this is not something we've encountered on our visits to date, but certainly it is something we are aware of that could happen in the future. Next slide, please, Kristin. So, sorry, Gretchen, this is my last slide. Again, it's just the contact information of the university extension folks who were involved in the development process. I did want to leave a lot of time for questions at the end. Bob, I have just talked for the last 30 minutes, including the time I talked to the woman who came to clean the little phone booth I'm sitting in the airport. So I'm going to turn it over to you if you've got anything to add.
Just to highlight a couple of things that I think might be helpful. You've already drawn attention to the major issues, but one of the things that is a takeaway is how intimately a person needs to know the rule in order to do an on-farm readiness review. So the idea of getting comfortable with the walk-around tool, but also make sure that the rule is clearly understood. And the other piece that as we've noted, is the training. We sometimes have this disconnect of this is the first time somebody's actually seen some of this stuff, and that isn't necessarily going to the strength of somebody that is willing and interested to do it. So there's many of the states are now doing practice sessions. And I think practice is the clearly a phrase that we need to pay attention to. It's without question has value to have thought about those kinds of things. And the definitions that are the application of the rule to farms has been another area where I think we've already seen just about every exception that we could imagine, and we'll probably learn of some more as we go along. But each kind of farm way of managing things presents some real interesting issues in trying to figure out how the rule actually applies, and is well worth our while to help figure out, both for us to be better at knowing whether somebody actually is regulated by the rule or has an exemption, or how that actually fits, and that is a part that we can do an on-farm readiness review on any size farm. We're not limiting it at all, but that figuring out what actually they have to apply to, or when the rule actually clicks into them, are some important aspects for that as well. the maps had some states that were not involved at this point. Hawaii, Kentucky, and Mississippi have all received grants in the last couple of weeks, and therefore will join that group. There are 2 exceptions to that being the state ag department, and that's in Alaska and in Indiana, where the health departments are actually involved. So if you're from either of those states, it's a different person, but the State Department of Ag still knows about these things and knows who's actually involved in them. So, and the idea of mentoring or practicing or figuring out how to do these things, and then there's several states that are going to experiment stations to actually do their practices and being able to look at it from that standpoint. Lots of moving parts going on. We're excited about this program. We're excited about getting manuals into real people's hands and moving on with that phase of the program. So I think let's just open it to questions.
Okay, thanks, Bob and Michelle. If you are logged into the online platform, you have the ability to mute and unmute yourself. So I welcome you to do that. While I give you guys a chance to think of your questions, one did come in through the chat box, Michelle, when you were talking about accessing and ordering the manuals. The question was, can an individual purchase a manual without going through an on-farm readiness review training course? Can they just buy them online?
I'm going to hand that question to Bob.
Okay.
We are not set up to sell them to individuals at this point. In fact, the shipping charges would probably make it prohibitive at this point. But if the state wants to sell it to somebody or give it to somebody, that's kind of their prerogative. But at this point, sales or distribution is set up to be through the State Department of Ag or the lead agency that's involved.
Okay. Okay, so again, if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself. There should be a little unmute button next to your name, or feel free to use the chat box and I can just read the question.
The manual is a wonderful resource, but it's really, it becomes that the real value of a resource, having gone through the OnFarm Readiness Review and having the usefulness of the walking around tool. And they're set up to help people doing the OnFarm Readiness Review be conversant and continue the conversation with the farmer. And lacking that, there's some, I think, less value than what it might actually be. But the real value is to go through the process.
I have a question. Can everybody hear me? This is Louisa from the Department of Agriculture.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
ahead, Louisa.
Great. So FDA CIFSAN members who are overseeing my state are really eager to conduct OFRRs in Hawaii, but I'm hesitant to proceed because I'm not yet trained in doing OFRRs, and I'm wondering what would happen if FDA did see an egregious activity while conducting OFRR in Hawaii, when I'm not yet trained, and they're leading it. So, what's your advice on that?
Well, FDA gets to do pretty much what it wants to if it's their rule. So, in fact, if they think it's an egregious condition and they see it, it depends on the size of the farm in most aspects, in that it's only kicked in for the big guys so far. So if it's a smaller farm, I hope they're aware of the fact that people aren't actually required to be in compliance and would not actually take any actions. But it's one of the things that we keep hearing from the farm community, is that they want the State Department of Agriculture to be the buffer between them and FDA. And I think what you're describing is that classic example where that's a potential situation.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I actually have two more questions. So you folks showed a slide about the NASDA website that's going to be launched in September on how to register to an on-farm readiness review training for each state. So that is sitting apart from the departments of agriculture who are registering people to have on-farm readiness reviews happen in their state, or I mean, I'm not quite sure I understand what this extra website will have.
the reference was to the fact that we will link to each state for somebody to sign up to actually have one performed. There's a lot of other stuff that will be going up on our website as well, and so it won't be limited to that, but that was the reference that Michelle made, was to the fact that any state that has a system set up will have it actually established. For the most part, farmers in any state, Hawaii or Indiana or whatever, are more likely to contact the lead agency, but we want to have the ability that people, in order to steer people to the right place, is one place that they can go, that they can get then to the place they need to be. But
got it.
Yeah, Louisa, that came from me, and so I teach in Florida, and we often have growers from Alabama and Georgia, other states in our training classes, the folks that come down for the winter. And so, you know, I tell them this is how you register in Florida, and I don't have a way to tell them how to register in their states. So NASDA is
sure
collecting that all to help educators in any state be able to tell someone from whatever state they were teaching to where to go.
Okay.
Interrupt, Bob.
And then just one more question. Sorry to take up everybody's. So in the future, of course, would there possibly be an app for the OnFarm Readiness Review tool, so that, you know, when you can easily jump when questions are not applicable, rather than continue to go looking for those questions that will be, that it jumps to the one that maybe logically would be applicable? Any possibility for an app like that in the future?
Future, the one. I've actually had some young farmers talking to me about this from the standpoint of even some of the records, and they've got some good ideas. I think at this point, we're still early enough in the development that it's not an immediate likelihood, but it certainly is. It lends itself to that, I think, eventually, and could be a fascinatingly useful tool to have. So I'm with you. I'm just not with you probably for this year.
Exactly. Okay. Thanks so much.
Okay, are there other questions?
Gretchen, there's one in the chat from Jeff Stoltzis. Wants to know if on-farm readiness reviews will continue after states begin inspections in January.
Yes. First of all, not everybody, the rule doesn't kick in for everybody, so there's still a couple of more years, and frankly, we're seeing that while they may taper off some, the value to somebody, just my own head is wrapped around the fact that I see farmers choosing not to grow covered crops till they figure out how some of these things are going to actually work, what kind of enforcement are their neighbors subject to, and all that kind of thing. So I don't see this as a one blush and then it's done, and that value of an assessment is over. It may change in the number of them that are requested, but I think that there's ample opportunity in the future.
Okay, and to follow up on that, I think this goes right along with that. There's a question in the chat box that says, will the curriculum develop into some kind of self-assessment option, presumably to be conducted by the actual farmer without the help of an on-farm readiness review team?
Maybe. We started out with that being an element. We have found, however, that asking the typical kind of view of a checklist is a yes or no answer, not an open-ended choice. And we have found that the GAP programs have cultured farmers to answer as quickly and move on to the next thing, which frankly isn't learning anything about what the rule requires. It's just getting through and getting to the point of being able to sell the product to whomever it is that has requested that you go through that process. So I think we are going to need to pay attention to what kind of results we get through these evaluations, what kind of things when we start seeing the inspections, what kind of understanding of the rule and the best practices that people are actually implementing before we can see whether there's portions of this that would be more likely useful to have a checklist to it. We didn't start out with this walking around questionnaire to begin with. We did it, in fact, we thought we were going to do checklists, and we've just found them inadequate to have the value. So stay tuned. We're not trying to make it more difficult than it needs to be, but frankly, the rule is complicated and it's very difficult. So yes and no on a lot of these things doesn't necessarily indicate that someone has the level of understanding of why FDA is requiring it that we think might be useful for them to make sure that they're not dinged at any point for non-compliance.
Yeah, and Bob, you made a really good point. I don't think I did a very good job, and Travis texted me to say that I didn't do a very good job explaining that the OnFarm Readiness Review tool and those walk-around questions are not a checklist. So it's not a simple, checklist like you would see on a lot of audits. Are you doing this or are you not doing this? It's very much more to do that deep dive and have that conversation. And are you meeting the requirements set out in the rule? So sorry if I wasn't clear on that fact earlier.
Yeah, to me, this has been a real educational process in learning how to pay attention to the impact of other programs having on what you can do or what you can expect are the outcomes. And I think we've struck on a way that's good. Some of the complications is how much better you have to understand the rule than you may have had to if it were a checklist, and how valuable these questions are in being open-ended. And what's left for us to learn is, have we got the right ones identified as the ones to actually start the conversation? And what do we learn back from the people who've done assessments as to the next level of questions that really got to the point as to whether they really understood the food safety principle that was required to put them in good stead. So we're not doing this the easiest way possible, and we can't do it that easiest way possible because it just simply will not help the farmer in the way that we're trying to do so.
Okay, anybody else have any other questions? If not, Dawn, now's your time to ask. I see Chelsea's unmuted herself. You have one, Chelsea?
Yeah, I do. I guess not to be representative of all farm orgs, but to kind of put together some farm org rumblings. I know that you guys don't have future trainings planned yet, and there's not really a timeline for when non-state, non-extension folks might be offered to be included in training, but I guess I'm just curious what if we can get manuals through our State Department of Ag. I understand you guys aren't selling them kind of openly, but I think a lot of farm groups are interested in trying to get a hold of the manual. I mean, a lot of folks are doing education and outreach. They are lead trainers. I don't see the harm in trying to offer an informal on-farm readiness review through a farm organization. I think some farmers would prefer that. I mean, there doesn't seem to be I think the tangible benefit for the on-farm readiness review through the state would be that you are potentially lower on the list for inspections if you go through an on-farm readiness review, and also, you're dealing with the people who are probably going to do an inspection if it does come up. But I think that at some point looping in other folks to do more informal on-farm readiness reviews would be a benefit. I'm just kind of curious about if you guys also see that as a benefit, or have concerns with that route. I know that's kind of, it's down the road. I understand that, but wanted to float that out there.
I certainly don't have any problem with it. We're finding our biggest hurdle is convincing FDA that there's value to continue to train people. They seem to think that one time through is enough, and we must have reached enough people. They're offering more of their own inspectional training courses, but are pushing us on it's time to move on to other things. So we may be calling on you to point out to the FDA that there's a broader value. And one of the things that we found from the inspectional programs that many of the people have been through, the ones that have been through an OnFarm readiness review training before they go on to the inspectional training program find that the FDA course makes more sense to them than if they've gone to the FDA course first. So part of it's the approach, part of it's the depth, part of it's that more conversational approach to things, and I think all of it has merit, and I think it has a longer life than what some of our current discussions with FDA have actually had. So it is down the road, and I would hope that we're able to do those kinds of things and to broaden it out. It's not on purpose that we're trying to keep this limited. It's a matter of trying to deliver when funding has been by hook and crook rather than a major portion of the way that we're doing things, and it limits it. It just does, and that's unfortunate.
You have your deliverables, and it's hard to do extra things beyond your deliverables.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know that situation.
I guess one other question, and this has kind of been filtering up to some of our sub-recipients across different states as they've talked locally with their departments of ag and how they're planning to roll it out. And I think you guys probably touched on this in the webinar, but just to see about if there's any kind of uniform way we're approaching it. Some states are being pushed to do an OnFarm readiness review on every single farm, even if they're exempt or qualified exempt. I think some states are trying to only do OnFarm readiness reviews for fully covered farms, and they're not looking to go to exempt farms, at least not at first. Are you guys making any recommendations about how states should handle it and just offering it to anyone who's asking for it, or trying to prioritize covered farms? Or
it may ferret out as much by the number of farms the state has that it thinks it needs to get to. We have argued the point and have won this debate that it should not be limited to just big farms. It shouldn't be limited to those that are not exempt. The part of the rationale of that is that some of these farms are trying to figure out if they're going to get bigger or not. And if you're exempt now but going to be bigger, why should you be penalized or not included right from the start? And aren't we really trying to increase the knowledge of food safety principles in general, rather than to look at it from a size objective? So from our standpoint, we see that as having value. We have said that it needs to be some level of uniformity and consistency. We push that point with the states, but some of them think that they have resource issues associated with that. So we're stressing the fact of the value that it has to be an important part of an this thing is big enough that it's mystifying as to what all is required of me. And if we can help to demystify, we've succeeded at a very important piece of making this program more functional and more understood. And if we can figure out the way in which that also streamlines the ability of people to be in compliance, we have safer food. We've accomplished the goal that FSMA set out to do in a manner that maybe FSMA didn't originally intend to be one of the ways to deliver things. But if we're successful, and if this is a way to do things, it should be something that's readily available regardless of size. I can see some of the prioritization issue. Maybe we can't do it now, but we'll do it later, or we're trying to get through these in the front end of this year, and could we schedule you later? Those kinds of things I can see definitely needing to happen, and just from the standpoint of priority setting.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. But glad to hear that the encouragement is to kind of offer it to anyone that's interested in learning more. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, I want to go back up. Oh, go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say there may be some states that put more limitations on it, but I hope not.
Okay. There's two more quick questions, and we're at the 3 o'clock hour, so I want to make sure we wrap up here in the next couple minutes. But one of the questions I saw come in was about, what about the states who did not receive CAP funding? You know, what's in their future?
There are 4 of them: North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, and Illinois. My conversations with very high-level people at FDA is they would like for me to figure out some way to convince the 4 to join. And I have had conversations of one kind or another. All 4 of them are in different situations and different points as to whether they might join or not. We're going to have the opportunity with the 3 new states, Hawaii, Mississippi, and Kentucky, to help jumpstart their processes and move them along faster than maybe what the original states did. So we're going to learn some things about how to maybe actually facilitate the 4 other states actually being involved. In the meantime, FDA is gearing up to be doing the lead activities in those states. So we're still willing to have those conversations. Some of it is size, magnitude of the program, and trying to figure out how they would make it work with, you know, a third of a person doesn't work too well if all you have is really a third of a person. So there's some of this that may have an impact on, so what other program activities either are changed, or how do we fund the whole program or a whole person in order to be able to do it. FDA is probably willing to sponsor that for at least the initial period of time, but it becomes a resource-based issue as much as anything. But we still have open conversations with all 4 states.
Okay, great. And this is the last question here. It's related to extensions being limited by our travel funding. Is there any potential for funding for on-farm readiness reviews for extension?
All of those things on this kind of, on FSMA-related activities probably have to go through the extension or through the lead state agency, so the Department of Ag. And I think in some states they have been more than willing to do that, and some states there's been no real formalized relationship. I know in a couple states they saw that as it takes a couple of years to establish a relationship and they needed to move faster, and wished now that they'd known that there would be a delay in the starting of inspections, because they could have developed relationships. So that kind of changes things. But I think start your conversations there anyway with the state lead agency and see if they're willing to actually be a part of making them happen. I think the program is stronger when extension and the ag departments are involved. So I certainly condone the idea and think it's a good way for us to move forward. And I think ultimately the farmer is going to be more comfortable getting technical assistance from extension than from a regulatory agency, and that adds value to it as well.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank both you, Bob and Michelle, for taking the time to talk to the group today. I think that was all super useful information, and I wish we had some more time for questions, but I do encourage you, the folks that are listed on the screen, I think are great points of contact, as well as Michelle and Bob, for answering questions about the on-farm readiness review. Bob or Michelle, you have anything else to add, or Kristin?
Thanks for setting it up. Michelle, thanks for taking the lead on, I think it went faster by you just covering the whole material, and I appreciate you being willing to do that.
You bet, and thank you, Bob, for answering all the hard questions.
Anytime.
And thanks, Kristin, for organizing. For our next meeting, we're going to skip over August. We've got quite a few people out on vacations, and we need a little bit of a breather. So our next meeting is tentatively going to be held in September. We haven't established a date yet, but likely later on in the month, and Connie Fisk is going to be organizing that one. But if there are other topics for discussion that you're really interested in, please let me know. Just send me an email. We're always happy to do meetings that are of interest to this group. And this was OnFarm readiness reviews, I think, is a really hot topic. So we appreciate having Bob and Michelle on the call today. And as usual, our contact information is on the website, and you can join our general listserv. And I know there's quite a few people on this call, a few names that I don't recognize. So if you want to be added to this listserv for the educators calls, you can contact me or Michelle Humiston. It is a different listserv than our general listserv. This is where we announce all of the meeting information, but we also will be posting that on our website. So if you don't sign up for the listserv, you can always pop on our website under the resources tab. If you drop down, there's a section for the produce safety educators call. So that's where the meeting recording and the notes and the future information for the next meeting will live. So thanks everybody for your time today, and we'll be talking to you in September.
Great, thanks Gretchen.
Yeah, thanks very much. Appreciate it.